Gregg, Jarrett, John Solomon are with us. So there's bias in two ways here, John. Number one is that they race and rush with, anybody can make, I think Donald Trump did this. And it's going to be 24/7 headlines, whether they've corroborated or not. They run to impeachment every single time, and they miss stories like yours, which was a massive, huge breakthrough in the deep state story, which we've all been working on now for almost 2 years.
Well, listen, anytime journalists get a story wrong, it disserves the public. And this is a big story, and it's a big wrong. It is very rare for a prosecutor to issue a statement like Robert Mueller did on Friday night. And, this is the same news organization that early on blew past the normal thresholds of journalism and decided to publish the unredacted dossier before it had done any verification. So it's not surprising that BuzzFeed standards have disserved them a second time. But I think the bigger issue is the rush to judgment that we saw all across the media. And this is a problem that in the Trump era you and I have talked about extensively and Gregg has written about. We have a media today that hopes that something is true rather than checks it to see if it is true. And until we fix that, until we wind that back, I think my profession is going to continue to disserve the public. And this story did nobody any good. It really didn't. It set us all back in journalism, and it set the country on an unnecessary roller coaster. So,
well, Chuck Todd is irritated about it in a Twitter outburst that the BuzzFeed story is being used to tar all in the media. Maybe forgetting that his network, they jumped the gun on this story all day Friday, and they jumped the gun on the Covington school story, and, even said that the kid was racist without any independent corroboration. Let's get back to with Gregg Jarrett. I thought last week was a huge breakthrough week in terms of the investigation into the deep state.
Right.
Further corroboration of your number one best-selling book.
Yeah, and the BuzzFeed story is Exhibit A. The credibility of the mainstream media in America is either dead or dying. At best, it's on life support. And, there were red flags all over the BuzzFeed story. First of all, BuzzFeed is the Charmin of toilet paper news on the Internet. It's soft and absorbent. They'll run with anything. And there were, their story made
you're
no
really
sense.
a wordsmith, Greg. Well, I got to give you credit for that one.
I never heard that one.
You could tell from the very beginning. I mean, who writes lie to Congress in a memo or, in writing somebody? Nobody does that. And second of all, it doesn't matter whether the discussions with Moscow ended in January or June. It doesn't make any difference. Why would you lie about that? Why would you lie about a non-crime? So, CNN and MSNBC, which ran wild with this, with their hair on fire for 24 hours, treating President Trump like a human piñata, should have known better, but they didn't care. They were so eager and anxious to bring down the president. There is no shortage of media malpractice in the age of Trump.
But it's always been. They're not honest about who they are.
Right.
Look, I tell anybody that will ask, what do you do for a living? I'm a talk show host. I am part of the media. I'm part of the press. I do straight reporting. I can hand over hours of radio and TV where I just go straight down the middle, report a story, usually, if it's a hurricane or Katrina, whatever it happens to be, the war in Afghanistan, Iraq. But then we've been doing for 2 years, all of us, investigative reporting. I also give opinion.
Right.
And sometimes we just have fun and cut up. But I say who I am.
Right. But
I'm like a full newspaper. They say they're news only.
Television anchors and hosts on MSNBC and CNBC pretend that they're fair and objective. They are not. They are motivated by political bias and personal animus. They are relentless in their quest to prove that the president is illegitimate, to drive him from office. They have abandoned objectivity and suspended all sense of fairness. They've allowed their enmity to cloud their judgment. They are open advocates for Trump's demise, and they pretend they are not.
John, I think the stories, we first started this journey when you co-authored a news piece about the intel, and in other words, that there was in fact
March
2017, and that the intel community had been weaponized for political purposes, and you saw a dramatic 350% increase in 2016 in surveillance, unmasking, and then we learned later leaking raw intelligence. We've been right every step of the way. Now, it's become the biggest abuse of power story scandal in modern history, and but for us, and a small group of us, there are others, it doesn't get reported. Why?
Yeah. It behooves me. There's a false choice that the media has put up, which is you either are investigating Trump or you're investigating the FBI. And the fact of the matter is you can do both simultaneously. We did it after 9/11. We did it to the CIA during the height of the Cold War with the church hearings. There is a willful desire not to look at the issues that the FBI misconduct clearly shows. And it is behooving to me because the FBI has access to tens of thousands of investigations a year and tens of millions of Americans' phone and email record. That is such an awesome power that journalism should use its good and its investigative reporting capabilities to keep an eye on that. And instead, we put a willful blind eye to it, except for a handful of us. I can't explain it other than to say that the profession has changed terribly.
It's a dereliction of duty. But, we have this rush.
It is a dereliction of duty. You're right.
Look, we have this rush to judgment. I learned firsthand a rush to judgment, and I was skeptical naturally in Atlanta with Richard Jewell. But it's advanced. Right. Cambridge Police, Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman. Look at Duke lacrosse. Look at UVA. Look at Ferguson, Missouri. Look at Baltimore. Look at nobody vetted Obama. I literally spent an entire year doing something nobody else would do. I think I've been proven right. And that is a dereliction of duty, especially because they were champions. They were openly getting, orgasmic on the air with thrills up their legs and everything.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Matthews, who's famous, I'm getting a thrill up my leg.
The feeling most people get when they hear a Barack Obama speech, I felt this thrilling up my leg.
Chris Matthews should never live that down. And, the media's reaction to the BuzzFeed story, which was, patently false, anybody with a brain knew it was untrue, shows that the media repeatedly and consistently convicts the president in the court of public opinion without any credible evidence, and they often do it based on false reports, and there have been many of them. Sadly, rank speculation is now treated as facts. Stories are agenda-driven, not information-driven. And you played the clips, Sean, a few minutes ago. Indictment, impeachment, imprisonment are persistent themes in both print and television news as they condemn the president at every turn. They demonize him. They declare him guilty of something, anything.
I found 47 printed pages from the Washington Examiner of the media's coverage of Donald Trump where they've been wrong. And that's just 1 year.
Wow.
That year is 2017. And we were scrolling it on Friday night. It happens with regularity. They never get held accountable because they'd have to hold themselves accountable. And, that's why I think there is an information crisis. More importantly, what is your story and the knowledge of two of the top FBI members under Comey being under criminal investigation, and now the story, Bruce Orr warning everybody about the whole FISA and the dossier.
Right.
Where does this now take us? Because in my mind, that would lead to an indictment of anybody that signed on to the FISA warrant if what the Grassley-Graham memo is saying is true, and that is it's the bulk of information in the application.
Well, while the rest of the profession was hyperventilating over the weekend over BuzzFeed and other silly stories, there was an important development. Lindsey Graham, the new chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, made clear he intends to dig into these issues in a big way. I know, Sean, you've been predicting that, but Lindsey Graham came out for the first time and said, this is part of my agenda for the next few months. He has subpoena power. He has many capabilities to get to the bottom of these issues. You've got several people who have resigned or were fired. You've got two under criminal investigation, and you got an FBI director who, by his own acknowledgement, had classified memos that he apparently gave to his defense attorneys. There are a lot of serious issues. A lot of bad actors were at the top of this FBI at a critical time when the Hillary Clinton investigation was being wound down and when the Donald Trump investigation was being spun up. And we have to keep digging until we get the answer.
I'm going to let Gregg respond to that on the other side. Quick break, right back. We'll continue. Gregg Jarrett and John Solomon with us. All right, as we continue with Gregg Jarrett and John Solomon here with us, we were saying before the break, John thinks the next step in the deep state investigation is going to head right to the Clintons and how they were feeding the FBI.
Sure.
How ironic, because they bought the dossier.
Right. Trump-Russia collusion was the Russia hoax, and I spent an entire book explaining it. The real and legitimate collusion was between Hillary Clinton and the Russians. She paid for Russian information that was given to her through an ex-British spy to damage Donald Trump. She fed it to the FBI and the Department of Justice, who ran with it, even though they never verified or corroborated the information. They had no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, no credible evidence to launch the investigation of Donald Trump in July of 2016, right after he got his nomination. But they didn't care. They used a phony document. They knew it was fabricated, and they used it as a pretext to not only investigate Donald Trump, but to lie to a court, to spy on his campaign. And then the worst of it came when the president fired James Comey. The FBI, in an act of vengeance and retribution, decided to abuse their counterintelligence powers to investigate the president over whether he's a Russian agent. It's outrageous.
I got to end this real quick, John. When do you think this new information is coming out that will tie the Clintons feeding the FBI this phony narrative?
I think later this week. I'm working on some stuff, and I know other reporters are, and I think there's a very clear pattern beginning to emerge. And, Gregg hit it on the head. They walked it into the FBI, but one of the more interesting things is when they walked it into the normal channels of the FBI, it got turned down, right? Chris Steele got turned down when he went to London on July 5th, so they had to go through the political channels, and I think that pivot is going to become very enlightening to the American public.
Well, that's also what McCabe said. No dossier, no FISA application. As a matter of fact, at the top of the hour, we're going to be joined by Carter Page and get his reaction to all of this. It impacted his life dramatically for a year. Gregg, Jarrett, John Solomon, thank you.